Okay, hi everybody. So we'll continue the session today. So today I didn't go as far as I wanted in my tutorial. So we'll catch up from where we started yesterday. We ended yesterday, uh, and um, and we will I will push some of the point that I wanted to present also today. I will push that for the next session because it's important that we continue this. The in-depth explanation of the tutorial functioning. And today I also want you to show how to connect to the cloud, and so that we can run some process on on the GPU or QPU available on the cloud. So the thing to do today now is to connect again to the Jupyter. If you have any question, if you have problem with your password, so the password is the one you enter the first time you connected. Let me connect to, yes. If you have any problem of connection, please let Arnaud know and he can reset your password if you cannot connect again. Um, and if anybody also didn't attend yesterday, please let Arnaud know and he will give you the instruction to pull everything, all the material necessary. So normally you see my screen,
Yes.
and the first thing you need to do is you need to open a new notebook and just make git pull. So be sure that you are in tutorial repository directory and make a git pull, which will get the new train material for today's session. So you should do that. And if everything goes fine, you have a message that is exactly this one. And the line to check is this one. You should see tutorial part 2, no solution display there. Then you go back to your directory and you check that the files is correctly there. The part 2, tutorial part 2 should be in your files. So please check that. And if anybody has a problem, please let Arnaud know. Okay, if it works, so we'll come back to where we were yesterday. So I will move on the yesterday tutorial. And we will transition to the tutorial part 2 after. So yesterday, I think we stopped somewhere here. Yes. So now you know what is a basic state, you know what is state vector distribution, source object. We have explored the components that we can use. And today we will start on the building circuits. Circuits that combine different components and simulating circuits through simulators, doing sampling and understanding how it works. So we start there on the section. So to go fast, you can also look at this tab here and you just click on LO circuits. LO stands for linear optic circuits. And we start from there. So the idea is that we saw that we could manipulate, we see the unitary matrix of individual components here, and we need to combine them to make a real circuit. So the object that we will manipulate is the circuit object. And then there is a very simple syntax, which is add. So you define a circuit, and then you add a component, another circuit to your circuit. So the syntax is you add, then there is a position of where you add. The position is from 0 to the number of modes. So my circuit has 3 modes. So I'm adding my first component BS on the first mode. Then I'm adding a second component phase shifter with a phase of pi over 2 on my first mode. Then I'm adding another component here, it is this part, with a parameter phi. And then I'm adding a new phase shifter, beam splitter on the mode 1. There is another alternative syntax that you can use, which is simply using the double slash syntax. So it's exactly equivalent. If you adding at the top, then you don't need to specify 0. Otherwise, you specify the position with by adding a tape here with the first is the position, the second one is the component. And you can display exactly as we see with a component the unitary. So this is the unitary of my circuit. You see that it's a symbolic unitary here. And then you say we can display the circuit itself. If you want to display the numeric use symbolic equal false. If you want to use display the it's not use symbolic. What did I do wrong? Oh no, of course I cannot. Why I cannot do that? So it's a good error. I cannot do that because I have parameters in my circuit. So I cannot display the numeric value because there is still some parameters here, phi, that is not defined. So it's a good error to learn something. So again, we have these parameters phi that we can make vary and change the value of these parameters. So the way to do that, I'm listing all the parameters in my circuit. So there is phi, there is no value. And then I can put a pi value to these parameters. And then I can display my unitary now symbolically false, and then this is the symbolic value of numeric value of my unitary, and my circuit is exactly the same. You see that there is still phi has been changed to pi here. So nothing special here. And yes, so you can combine also other circuits. So this one is the permutation we built yesterday. If I combine my permutation with my permutation again, we check that we get the identity circuit here. So it's normal if you just follow the gate, the mode, we are back to identity. Okay, so we try to do so in the presentation yesterday on Tuesday. I was showing this circuit, and we were showing that by moving the phase here change, we can have the photons arrive either on this detector or this detector. This setup, beam splitter, this is a mirror, so we don't really care. It doesn't change the circuit, but the setup is beam splitter, phase shifter, beam splitter. So this one is what you call a MZI, and Mach-Zehnder interferometer. And this is something very basic. It's kind of the minimal brick that you are using everywhere in circuits. And one of the reasons that we are using MZI is that technically it's very hard to have a beam splitter with reflectivity that change. So since we cannot have a physical beam splitter with a reflectivity that change, we combine, we make a MZI, and we will see that the MZI actually is exactly equivalent to a parametrizable beam splitter. So we want to reproduce this setup. So it's for you. So how do you make a circuit? The name of the circuit will be MZI. That will represent that. So we want here to have a parameter with a phi value instead of this phase shifter here. So I give you 2 minutes to do that. So it's quite straightforward. So we will just define in one line. So we define a circuit. Then we append a beam splitter. So we say PCBL comp dot beam splitter here. Then, so since there is no parameter to beam splitter, it's equivalent to 50-50 beam splitter. 50% of the light is going through, 50% is reflected. We add a phase shifter with parameters that we call phi. So to define a parameter, use the PCBL.P, and then we add a new beam splitter at the end. PCBL comp, yes. And this one will be PCBL comp too. So you see it works. Why it is equivalent to this one? So I mentioned that the mirror, we don't care because the mirror is just a way to route the light. In fact, is so we could take this beam splitter and put it here and try to align in free space to have the current angle. So there is a lot of mirrors on the optical table, but they don't have any use on a schematic. On the schematic, we can always redirect the fiber wherever you want. And the trick here is that you see that the beam splitter is horizontal, where here it's a diagonal. So we could even make that a bit shorter, so we don't even need the PCL circuit 2 here. If you do that, it's exactly the same. And why? Because PCL comp.bs, I told you yesterday, is a component, but any component is already a circuit. So as soon as you try to combine components, then it makes a circuit. Where you need to define a circuit is if we wanted to have 3 modes. If you wanted to have 3 modes, then if here you wanted to say, okay, I will add a new beam splitter on my second mode, and you cannot expect that your circuit will dynamically become bigger because it doesn't know that there is 3 modes. So it will just tell you, no, I cannot because there is only 2 modes. So in that case, you need to define that there was 3 modes. So again, for that circuit, the very simple solution is this one. It's elegant, and there's nothing to do. Beam splitter, phase shifter, beam splitter. So what we'll do now is that we will make the phase vary, in fact, of the here, and we will be looking at the. So if I display my unitary here, plus MZI. So if I display my unitary, you see that it's there is phi here. So what we want to do is to compute and something very easy to know is that if we send only one photon here, and we want to check the probability of the of getting a photon on the first mode, then I told you that what we'll be doing to do that, we'll be doing the permanent. But the permanent of what? The permanent of the unitary, where we take the first column for because the photon arrives on the first mode, and the first row because we are looking for the first mode output. So we're taking the permanent actually of the first cells of the matrix, that one matrix that is exactly that. And the permanent of the first cell is the cell itself. So if you want to know the probability of getting the light going on the mode 0, if we send the photon on the mode 1, then we can just take the square of the norm of these cells that will give us the probability. So it is what we are doing here. So we are making phi vary between 0 and 2 pi here. So I'm taking 1000 sample of pi of value between 0 and 2 pi. And I'm putting in y the probability of getting the photon on mode 0. So if I do that, I'm getting this curve. And you should have the same. So what does that mean? That means that when the photon, when the phase is 0, so remember it is that we are trying to model. When the phase is 0, then the probability of getting the photon on the first detector is 0. This is, we are looking at the probability of getting on the first detector, on this one is 0. So that means that when the phase is 0, the photon goes from this mode to this mode. All the light is directed from this mode to this mode. When the phase is pi, so we imagine that it's exactly pi here, then all the light is going to the detector 1, since the probability of getting the photon in the first mode is 1. And this comes back to 0 when phi is 2 pi. So what did we achieve here? We achieved exactly what this circuit. When we don't have any phase here, we are going all to one detector, which is the one. When we are putting a phase that is pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, so the period, we send all the light here. So it's exactly what we wanted. We have reproduced this schema. And something to, it's not that surprising actually. It's, I told you and actually Shane told you that when he made his class on the mathematics of linear optics. And I reminded you that on Tuesday, that any unitary 2-2 is a beam splitter. So it's not surprising that this component, this MZI behaves as a beam splitter. And what is new, and that is very good news for us, is that it's a parameterizable beam splitter. Again, it's something that physically is very hard to do, to make some parameters to change the reflexivity of a beam splitter. So, but if you combine beam splitter, phase shifter, beam splitter, it's what you are doing. Okay, so very simple circuit, and we know what is MZI now. Okay, let's suppose that we want now to do the other way around. We have a unitary, and we want to make the circuit corresponding to this unitary. So so let's suppose that you have a 3-3 unitary, and what we'll be using here is what we call a decomposition method, which is built in also in Perceval. The decomposition method means that you are taking unitary and you want to find a circuit that implements your unitary. And this is a very common need. In fact, every time we are doing some algorithm, you are designing a circuit. The circuits will have some shape that you don't know, that is exactly reflecting what you want to do. But you want to put that circuit on a photonic chip that has a different design. So you need to compile your circuit to go on the photonic chip. And to do that, what we do is that we take your circuit, we compute the unitary, and then from the unitary, we find the circuits that's corresponding to the physical hardware. So it's an operation that is going in the background that you don't even see, but that is happening every time we're running a circuit on the QPU. So how we do that? We are using random unitary of 3. We are using a function that is called decomposition, and that takes 2 parameters. The first parameters is this one. this one is the cell that you want to reproduce in the decomposition. I will explain you that just after. And the second one is the fact that you will be using phase shifter to to compensate for the remaining phase at the end of the decomposition. So let's do that, and you will see that's how it works. So what did I do? I say, okay, I have my unitary here, and then I want to decompose this unitary into a circuit. So, and for that, you can use the components, these components, with two angles, theta and phi. Phi is one of the phase that is on the beam splitter, and then you can use at the end remaining to adapt the global phase. You can use a phase shifter here. What if I'd remove that? What will be the result? Will be exactly the same, but without this phase colon. This phase doesn't change anything. When you send light on a photon, single photon on the photonic chip on circuits, you don't know the phase of the single photon you are sending. So the fact that you are adding or not this phase shifter colon here doesn't change anything on the result, but does change the unitary. So if you are now to compile to check that the unitary that we implemented is the same, then you see that if I'm taking the difference, the norm, so it is the L2 norm between my unitary and the unitary of the circuit that I just designed, and you see that the norm is very small. Yeah. If I had removed that, that phase colon that you have there, then you see that the distance is huge, actually. It's normal because if without this phase, you cannot find the unitary, but technically, without the phase, the single photon will behave exactly the same in your circuit. So it's something to know that the global phase here makes a big difference, but only in the computation of the unitary. The other thing to check, and you can do that multiple times, is that if you run that, you will see that you don't obtain exactly the same value every time. So there is some change here. And this is normal. This is normal because there is multiple decomposition for a single unitary. All of them are equivalent. And there is multiple decomposition algorithm. There is a rec that is producing a rectangle form. So let us try that with a larger matrix. So if I'm taking 5, why it is a rectangular form, you see that it is this design. So rec is the first decomposition algorithm that was introduced. It is in 1994, which is very efficient and is very neat. If you are interested in the mathematics of that, look at the paper. It's very interesting, in fact, the way it is being done. But there is one major flaw in that decomposition, is that you see that depending on the mode where you are, the number of components that your photon will go through is different. For instance, the photon that we are sending on the mode 4 will only go through one single component plus the phase here. While the photon that you are sending on mode 0 is going through 4 different components. And this technically makes a difference because you know that the main enemy that we have in quantum photonic is the loss. And the more components you're adding on the path on the photon, and the higher loss you will get. So we expect that these circuits will have a very different loss between the mode 0 and the mode 4, which will affect your algorithm. So you can take into account this property, because reversely, you could think that, okay, if it is really a problem of mode, then I will put my most important mode at the bottom of my circuit, and the one where I don't care, for instance, on CRs or post-processing Herald on the top mode. So you can use that property if you want to to take that into account. But practically, the photonic circuit that we are using have always a rectangular shape, and I will show you that when we go on the cloud. And this is the rectangular shape is called the Clemens design, or there is another design that's called the Bell design. All of them are universal. Universal means whatever is the unitary matrix I'm taking, I will find a circuit's implementation. So all of you have taken some random unitary that is different than mine, and then you should all of you have gotten a circuit. This is the proof that you have universal. Whatever is the unitary you are taking, there is a circuit implementing that unitary. Here let's do exactly the same that we did. So I told you that a beam splitter that is parameterizable is something that we don't have. So instead of doing that, let us do the same, but using the MZI that we have defined just before. So I let you here there is one single line to put here to make the decomposition using the MZI and not using the beam splitter with these two parameters. Okay, so we just take that and we replace by them. We'll first try to replace by the MZI that you have defined before. So I won't use this one. I will use the one that we have defined just before. That was here. And we'll see what happened. This one, yeah. So I'm commenting this one, I'm taking this one. Okay, and the only thing I need to do is to put MZI here. So I told you MZI circuit and component are exactly the same. So wherever you have a circuit, you can put a component. It's just recursive. So let's try that. And there is a error here. Okay. It didn't work. So it didn't find the PDisplay says that circuit U is none. That means that it didn't find the decomposition. And the reason it didn't find the decomposition is very simple, is that there is missing one parameter. I told you that we saw that there was two parameters here, theta and phi, so degree of freedom, and here we had only 1 degree of freedom. So if we take the full MZI plus the additional phase here, it works. So when we look at that, you see the MZI here, and you see that there is this additional phase here. If we don't add this additional phase, then we don't have enough degree of freedom to implement a random unitary. Some of them will work. So maybe for you it did work, but on my side it didn't work. So we didn't have enough degree of freedom. And one easy way to understand why, in fact, is that a unitary matrix has n square parameters. So it's complex parameters. There is n squares. It's unitary. That means that you can take only the upper diagonal. So there is n square over 2 complex parameters. So that at the end there is n square parameter, real parameters. And you cannot expect that you can implement a unitary without less than n square parameters. And if you calculate here, there will be exactly n square real parameters. So it's just a number of degree of freedom that we have here. And if we look at the distance, so it's circuit U, it does work. So last thing we'll do, and after we'll move to the next tutorial, we'll see that you can do that recursively. So here what I'm doing, I'm defining a circuit that is a Bell state preparation. And then I'm doing two MZI that I'm calling upper MZI and lower MZI, and then I'm combining them as yes. So what did we do here? We just did what we did before, but we recursively added the circuit inside the circuit. And this is very convenient when you are doing some algorithm where you have some state preparation, when you have some Oracle, when you have some whatever, for instance, if you want to implement Grover. So you can physically put box where you have your sub-circuit. You can still display the complete circuit here with the recursive true. Yeah. So here we can see what we are doing. There is Bell state preparation. We mix the two modes so there's a qubit 1, qubit 2. We make a H Hadamard gate. Then we mix the two, we swap between the two qubits, and then we apply MZI here. Okay, that's everything you need to know to build circuits. Now we'll move to the second tutorial where we'll show how we can make simulation, and then we'll go to the cloud and how to connect to the cloud and run circuit on the cloud. So for that, please open the tutorial part 2. That's normally you have in your directory if the Git pull works. So if it doesn't work, if you didn't do this, just make sure that you do git pull in the tutorial directory, and you should see something like that. If I do it again, it will tell me that everything is up to date. Okay, tutorial part 2. Yeah. So running again, my Perceval version is correctly installed. And what we'll be doing is we'll be trying to go into detail of the HOM experiment. So HOM stands for Angu Mendel. Please look at this Wikipedia page that explains what is going behind. And I showed you that in the PowerPoint on Tuesday. The setup is very, very, very easy. You are sending 2 photons on a beam splitter, and you have 2 detectors, and you expect if the photons are exactly indistinguishable, you behave that they will interfere, and they will interfere by selecting one of the detectors. If you are sending 2 photons and one of them, if they are not one of them, if they are not indistinguishable, then you will see that there is a click in the 2 detectors. It is what you call a coincidence when the photons click simultaneously on the 2 detectors. So it's something very easy in the lab to reproduce. You have your setup, you have your SNSPDs, and then you are just watching the click you have on the detectors, and it's going very fast. So you have a clock of 80 megahertz, and you just count the number of times you have a simultaneous click on the 2 detectors. So, and it's just electronic to do that. And the double click will be the proof, that there is some indistinguishability in the system. So we'll be doing that. So this circuit is not that important by itself, but we will use that circuit to illustrate the different way you have to do simulation and sampling using Perceval. So my circuit cannot be simpler than that. So it's even simpler than the MZI. It's just I'm taking beam splitter H. I could have taken RX. I could have taken any of the beam splitter. It will be doing the same, because the difference between them is phase. And if we are just detecting there, we don't care about the phase. So, but the setup is this one, where we'll be sending 1 photon in the upper mode and 1 photon in the lower mode, and we are interested in the probability of the different states we can get there. So the first thing we'll be doing is we'll be using backends. So there is a link here to the documentation of the backends on Perceval. So you have different backend available for you. Clifford, Sloss, Naive, Stepper, and MailPS. So there is a documentation on that table, but the thing to understand that Clifford is a sampler, means that it's exactly behave as a physical device, and every time you call the algorithm, it produces one sample. So this one is in some way your best friend when you are doing some algorithm because it's behaving exactly as a hardware. Sloss is a super strong, so it's an algorithm that we have implemented at Candela. It's a super strong algorithm that gives you all the probability amplitude of your system. So and it's very fast. The thing is that the number of the if you have a large circuit and large number of photons, then it will fail because it requires a lot of memory. And naive is just the computation of the permanent. And I will go also through the stepper after a bit later. So, but this is just maths in some way. So we have mathematical tools that help you to make some simulation. So backends will have different methods. Clifford and Clifford will give you sample method, and the other simulator, Sloss and the naive, will give you probability amplitude and probability. Note that a physical device don't have probability amplitude and probability. You will never have access to this value. It's reason why we say that's not physical. It's just mathematical. So it's good to define an algorithm, to try an algorithm, but when you will go using your QPU, then the only thing you will have access to is a sample. Probability is always something that is hidden from the. So let's go back there. So I'm running this. So what you see is that I'm running the three backends that I mentioned, Naive, Sloss, and Clifford. For each of them, and I will be testing the output of three different quantum states in the output. So since I'm sending two photons, what are the different states I can get? I can get the two photons on the upper mode, I can get the two photons on the lower mode, or I can get one photon in each mode. So the three states that I will get are these three states there. Then I will calculate, use the backend to calculate the probability amplitude that we have each output state, knowing that we'll be sending as an input state one photon in each arm here of the beam splitter. So with the naive backend and Sloss backend, you have exactly the same result. Not surprising because they are doing the same. They are just the algorithm behind is different, but you get the same result. You see that you can get the probability amplitude of the three states, the probability of the three states. And not surprisingly, we see that we have 50% of the chance that we have all the photons on the upper mode, on the lower mode, and 50% on the upper mode. So it's what you expect. It is this schema. The two photons are sent. They are either coming all on these detectors or all of them on these detectors. Clifford and Clifford, I don't have access. So if you run it removing a try except, you will get some exception because it will tell you Clifford and Clifford doesn't have probability amplitude and probability method. So you don't have this defined, but you can get some samples. So Clifford and Clifford is doing some samples. And if I'm taking 10 samples, I'm seeing that, okay, I have the first four are on the top, then there is on the bottom and so on. So this will change every time. And this will be, of course, totally random. You have this sampling that you observe that you can reproduce. So note that the sample method is not available for naive and Sloss. They are not able to do naive or sampling, but it's easy to imagine that since you have the probability, we can sample from the probability. But technically, they cannot do that natively. So the second thing we'll be doing is we'll be using, show you how to use what you call the stepper. The stepper is something that maybe you are more familiar if you have played with other uh, um, quantum framework. It's the ability to look at your circuit and go through all the different components and just the update the output state, the quantum state at every component. So in our case here, we have only one component that is this beam splitter. So it's not very challenging to go through one single component, but what is interesting is that it doesn't give you probability, it doesn't give you a probability amplitude or samples, it gives you the quantum state. So you just make the quantum state evolve, and to make the quantum state evolve, you are applying this method, stepper, apply the quantum state you are taking, and you make it evolve through the different component of the circuit. So R and C are the component of the circuit. So for instance, if I was starting with uh, a quantum state, a state vector that is already already in superposition mode. For instance, there's 2, 0 plus 0, 2. Then you get your circuit that gives you that. You cannot do the same with naive or sloth backend that just take some basic state as the input. So the stepper is very interesting, and it allows you also to debug a circuit when you have 10 components, and you can see how your quantum state evolved through the 10 components. It is not natural at all for photonic. You know, it's the reason why I told you that for other framework like Qiskit, for instance, it's very natural because technically when you are running some algorithm and some circuits in Qiskit, technically the state is evolving. You apply the first component, and then you apply the second one, and then there is an evolution in time. With photon, it's not the same. The photon, there is no possible decomposition. The process apply instantly. So it's at the end you have the same result, but it's important to understand that the photonic is just one immediate application of a complex circuit and not some step-by-step process. Still, you can simulate it, and it's an interesting tool for debugging. So this is the two tools you have that's kind of mathematics, but we'll be more interested now at looking at more physical simulation you have. And for that, we need to take processors. Why I say that this is physical? Because the processor is exactly behaving as a QPU. The backend is not pretending to acting as a QPU. You cannot model loss, you cannot model anything with the backend. It's just a mathematical tool that you have here. So sometimes when you define an algorithm, you work with the backend just at the very beginning, but when you will be sending that to a QPU, you need to look at how it works on a physical QPU and physical device. And for that, the best tool is to use the processor. Processors read the main object that you want to use there. So, and with the processor, we'll be able to take into account noise. We'll be able to take into account that you have a real source, that you have a threshold detectors, that you have loss in your circuit. Everything that you have on the QPU, you can take into account with a processor. So, how you do that? So I'm taking my HRM circuits, I'm giving the input of my processor, which is 1, 1. If you are using some QPU online, the with input effect will have will be to route the photon to the input mode of the processor. So behind the scene, you have some shutters that will just be routing the photon in the mode you want to send them. Yeah. So you are sending the same basic state, 1, 1. And then you call some methods on the sampler that are predefined. The methods will be, so for that you are using a sampler. And the first method and the most native method that you have is the sampler count. Is as you have in Qiskit when you say, okay, give me 1,000 shots of my circuit. Okay, I was very lucky, and I have a 50-50% distribution here. But if you do that again, you will see that it changes, of course. It's just a random distribution. So you will have some random noise around that. So sample count is, if I was to send that on a QPU, I will not change a line here. I will just do exactly the same. The only thing that will change, I won't say I'm sending that to source. I will be sending that to a remote processor, as we'll see later. With the processor, we have also some nice features. One of them is the analyzer. The analyzer is allowing you to make a lot of measurements and put them in a table. So here I want to say, okay, but what if I'm sending 0, 2, 1, 1, 2, 0 as the input, and give me the distribution I have in the output. And it just do that for you. So behind the scene, it will just call sample count, and will estimate the probability. But it just gives you this table. And once again, the one that you are interested in, this line, if you are sending one photon in each arm of the beam splitter, you have 0 probability of getting 1, 1. It's again, it's the HOM effect that you are looking at. So we will be doing that on the random unitary. So, oh, there is the solution on my, I'm not running the good one. Why? Okay, so you have already the solution here that is not on your, I don't know why. Oh, you do see the solution on yours also, Arnaud?
Yes, we do.
Oh, okay. So I didn't remove the solution. So you have already a solution when there's supposed to be something to do here. Sorry about that. So, but whatever. So what we'll be doing, it's very simple here. We take a unitary, random unitary. We were sending 2 photons. I'm not even trying to calculate the circuit of this unitary here. It is a circuit. I don't want to physically see the circuit. I don't care. And I will just send 2 photons on the 2 upper arm, on the 2 first mode, and 0 photon on the last mode. And I will be sampling with that. And here is what I get at the output. So I have 2 photon, 3 modes. How many states do I have? I have, but they are listed here. So my 2 photon can be on different possibilities. So 1, 2, 3, and then they can be bunch, what you are calling bunching, coming together. There is 3 modes. So there is 6 possible output state. Yeah. And more generally, if I had n photo m mode, then you look at the bar and star prime to know. So it's the combinatory of choosing n state between m plus n minus 1. So, and this is going very fast. It's a number that's grow very, very, very fast. So here I do the same. I get my circuit. I'm getting some sample. So nothing different, but the interesting thing here is that we can say, okay, I would like to do the same with a real source. So for that, I would like you to do the same that we did yesterday. So we define a source object as it was in the previous tutorial, and then we run the same circuit with the imperfect source. So what I'm calling a real world source, and we look at the result we get there. So I'm letting you put that together. The source object will be the last object of the processor, the last parameter of the processor. So you just need to define a source, a real world source as we did yesterday, and modify your definition of processor like with that. So how did we do that yesterday? going back to the tutorial, real world source, perfect source, real world source. So we take that. I'm defining my real world source. I'm defining my processor here. And I'm adding my real world source as parameters of my processor. And here is what I get. So a few things to see here. So we have more than 6 states. We said that there were 6 possible quantum states if you're sending 2 photons in 3 modes. Now we have far more than that. And we can see that we even have 3 photon states. How it is possible? It's possible because we have introduced some multi-photon components. It is what we saw yesterday. It's the G2. So it's the possible imperfection that is rare, but that's sending some additional photons while it's generating the photons. So this is noise, 3 photons. This is more or less what you expect. This is 1 photon only. Why 1 only? Because the other one has been lost. Again here, and again here there is 1 photon. So most of the sample we get don't have 2 photons. It's normal because we are in what you call the high loss regime. If we are putting high emission probability of 1 here and 0 loss, then you will see that most of your outputs are the same. The first one are the same that the one we get in there. It's expected because of that. However, if we are looking at the distribution, we would see that the distribution is not exactly the same because the source is not perfectly indistinguishable. So it is what we'll be looking at a bit more careful. So let's put back some loss here, 30% loss in there. So the last parameter we want to take into account is the detector. So I told you that there is 2 types of detectors that we can use. One of them is what you call the threshold detector, and it's a very basic one. Is the superconducting SNSPDs, where we have this nanowire, and when there is a photon or multiple photon that arrive to the nanowire, you have some change of state of the detectors, and then you can detect a signal. By default, this setup doesn't allow to get any differentiation between 1 photon and 2 photons. So the fact that you are receiving 2 photons is doing exactly the same. You will just make the transition of the state of the SNSPD, and you won't be able to make differentiation between 1 and 2 photons. So you can simulate that with Perceval by using what you call thresholded output. So you tell the processor that it needs to behave as a threshold output processor. What do we see here? Okay, so we have less state than here. It's normal because it doesn't make any more the difference between 1 photon and 2 photons. So basically, this state here will be adding up with the states 2, 0, 0 that you have somewhere. Or maybe you don't have this one because it's too rare. But yeah, no, these 2, 1 are the same, actually. Because we cannot make the difference. So this working with threshold output is something very common. And on Ascalar that you have online, you have a chip where you have 4 modes that have PNR, photon number resolving detectors, and 8 modes that have threshold detectors. So it depends on what you want to do with your algorithm, but it's one of the features you need to exploit when you are using the mods. You need to think, do I need to resolve the number of photons or not? Does my algorithm need that or not? So let us apply that on the HRM experiment. So what we want to do, we want to to run that experiment, the HOM that we have here. But we will make vary the parameter of indistinguishability that we have on the source. So the source have this parameter of indistinguishability. So we make that parameter vary between 0 and 1. And we want to see, to use a real setup with a threshold detector, which is what you have in the lab. And we want to see how the difference of ratio between the 1, and the total number of events that we detect. So the 1 is the coincidence rate, and the total number of events is the number of click that we can see on the lab. So here I want to make that this vary. So I'm taking a real world source with an indistinguishability that will vary between 0 and 1,000 steps there. I'm taking my processor, I'm sending 2 photons input, I'm using a thresholded output, and then I'm doing my sampling. I'm taking 10,000 shots here, and then I would like here to be able to calculate the ratio 1 divided by the total number of events. So I let you think about that 1 second. Okay, so basically what we want to do, we have this sample count here, so we'll just iterate through the results here. So let us have some variable for the number of events. Total events equals 0, total coincidence equals 0, and for we go through the basic states and the counts as iterating in I'm taking that results items. So every time I have that, I increase my number of events plus equal counts, and I can check that if I have a coincidence, that means that my basic state mod 0 equal 1 and BS 1 equal 1. This is the definition of a coincidence, to a total coincidence plus equal 1. And that's all, basically. And I will append to Y append total coincidence. Okay, that's all. And I'm displaying that. And this is not +1, this is plus count. Okay, so what do we see here? So this is very interesting. So we are looking at the ratio between the ratio of coincidence rates over the total number of events. If my photons are purely indistinguishable, we have the minimum, which is not 0. So I will comment on that a bit later. We have the minimum, and you see that the definition of the indistinguishability is quite right, because I have a linear decrease of my indistinguishability with the number with the ratio of a double click. So just for you to see the HOM experiment, if you go to this link, Okay. It's a very famous experiment, and everyone working on photonic knows what is HOM. And there is what we call the HOM deep, in fact. So the HOM experiment that is described in this page is exactly the same, but instead of making the indistinguishability vary, because it's something that we cannot do physically, what they do is that they make the time vary between the two arms. So they have their beam splitter, and on one of the photon on one of the arm will be delayed compared to the other one, meaning that if it is too completely delayed, then it will be totally distinguishable. If it is not delayed at all, the minimum will be totally the same. And we see this curve, which is exactly the same coincidence proton pairs ratio, and then photon pairs. And the minimum will be then when the derivative will be 0. That is, there is no indistinguishability. And the maximum will be when the delay is increasing. So it's exactly the same that you are seeing here. So on our side, we don't have the delay on our setup. We just make the indistinguishability very directly, and we see that. Last comment is why it's not 0, because you have the G2. Remember that you need to take into account that some part of the noise is because we have added some additional photon coming from somewhere, the laser, from some spontaneous emission, maybe in some part of the circuits that can happen in the detectors that will detect some event that doesn't exist. So you will have always some small parts of noise that is coming from this additional detection. Okay, that's all. We have the processor. So with that, we'll be able to run something online. I will just do, before going there, I will just go quickly on, there is missing something on my tutorial. Anyway, simple qubit gates, I'm skipping that. There is, it's the same on your side, Arnaud? Normally, there is a definition here. I probably remove some extra line here.
I have exactly the same as you, so
Okay.
no definition.
So I will update on on GitHub. There is missing thing here. The goal of this part is just to try to find which quantum circuit can make a RX, can make a H, can make all the different standard gates, one single qubit gates that you know. So it's very simple, and it's just playing with unitary matrix. I'm skipping this part, but because the most important one is going to CNOT. So we'll be implementing a CNOT gate. And there is multiple way to do that in Perceval, in photonics. And Perceval has the method implemented. The first one is to use path encoding. So path encoding is what we mentioned so in the presentation on Tuesday. We'll be using two modes for each photon, and the upper mode will be if we put the photon in the upper mode, we say that it's logical qubit L1. If we put the photon in the lower mode, it will be 0, or the other way around, you don't care, it's exactly the same at the end. So we'll be showing that how to implement a CNOT gate. So in Perceval, you have a catalog of predefined circuits. So in this catalog, you find three CNOTs, actually, KLM CNOT, RL CNOT, post-process CNOT. You have some CZ, you have some MZI, you have CCZ, and you have Toffoli gates that are defined. So we'll take one of these gates. So I'm taking the post-process CNOT, which is also called the Ralph CNOT because of the author who made that. So when you take a component from the catalog, you have some information about the documentation of the component. So CNOT with two heralded modes and one post-selection function. It is described in this article. And the schema is this one, so textually. So it is a 6-mode circuit. But there is two modes that are used for ERAD. So it is what I mentioned in my presentation on Tuesday. These modes are physical modes. but we are just sending 0 photon in this mode, and we are detecting 0 photon in this mode. When you are working with a processor, you can put that logic. So we could say, okay, I will send my photon in this mode, and I will check manually if there is no photon in the output. But the processor is doing this for you, so you don't need to care about how to manipulate that. The processor will be just sending 0 photon because it's defined as an herald, and post-selecting the states of your sampling by removing all the possible output that doesn't match this heralding schema. So there is some kind of black magic behind. So you are doing sampling, maybe you get 10,000 samples out of 1 million, because all the other samples will be post-filtered by Perceval that will check that in order to check that the heralding pattern is correct. So I'm doing exactly the same with that. So you take your catalog, you build the processor, you define the sampler with your processor, exactly as we did. Something new here is that we define an input that is a logical state. So here I'm not talking about photon, I'm sending logical state 0, 0. How I can do that? I can do that because I define ports in my processor, and the ports say, okay, my 2 first modes are logical, my 2 following modes are also logical, and there is some mode, but you don't care about that are herald. So I will show you that we could see the circuit from that. So if you don't request for the processor, but for the circuit. Okay, this is this circuit. So this is the processor, this is the circuit. So the thing we are manipulating so far were circuits. The circuit doesn't have any post-processing, heralding, logic, whatever you have. So you see in particular the mode 4. The mode 4 in that circuit will be an herald 0. Here, if I simulate this circuit, then there won't be any post-selection, there won't be anything that from the output, it will just give me all the raw output from that. When I'm using the processor, all the post-selection has been made. It will check that every state I get is a logical state, so it will remove all the state where there is missing photon. So this is very convenient because you don't have to do anything. You just let the Perceval just doing what you call the post-selection for you. So here I'm post-selecting some states, and you see that these states, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, these are all logical states. And they're all the same. Why they're all the same? It's normal. It's a C note. And with a fixed input here, fixed input. So it's normal that the output is exactly a C note. There is something that comes with that. A new thing that comes with that is the sample logical perf. So you remember that when we are trying to get the results here, we are taking results. So we get the result, the output, the sampler, and we are taking the results. So this is a dictionary, and some parameters, some key of this dictionary is the logical performance. The logical performance is how much of the states must be, of the output states will be post-selected by Perceval. So we have something that is this. So if we see what is this number, in fact, this number is 1/9 over 2. This is the logical performance of the Ralph CNOT gate. So what does that mean? And it is also what you call a probabilistic CNOT gate in photonic. It means that you apply your circuit, you make a lot of samples, but out of the samples you get, there is a lot that are not logical, that are automatically post-selected. And at the output, there is only 1/9 of your output that will be logical and that we keep them at the end. So it's not so much a problem for a CNOT gate because you have a 80 megahertz clock, then you are just removing one out of 20 here. It will be an issue if we are multiplying the number of CNOT in your circuit because each of the CNOT will have the same post-selection rate. And then at the end, it will give you some very low coincidence rate at the end. So moving on, I will be using the analyzer that we defined before. So I want to make the truth table of this component. So how do I read that? I'm reading that I'm sending 4 possible inputs. I'm looking for 4 possible output state, and I'm labeling them by 0001. So it's just for readability here. And I'm launching the analyzer on that, on my circuits, and then I'm looking at the truth table, and you see that it's exactly a CNOT gate with a performance that is not 1, with a fidelity that is 1. It is a perfect circuit. We can do exactly what we did before by adding some noise, so adding some real source. So I will take my real world source. Here, so just for the sake of demonstration, I will not make any loss. I will just make some likely noise that you can get, and I'm adding that as the input of my processor. So actually, oh, I have some blank. I don't know how to add. I don't know, maybe you know. Let me check the documentation. Oh, it's simply dot source. Okay. Okay, now, so I added some noise on my processor, and I will do again the logical truth table, and it's more or less okay. So we still have one here. We have some mismatch here, and a fidelity of 97% with more or less the same performance. So what is interesting here is that I've taken some real life noise for my circuit, and more or less I get natively something like this without any error correction. On that, I have something like 98% fidelity on the CNOT gate. So if it's exactly what you will get out of a real QPU without trying to do any fault correction here, error correction. And last thing I want to show you before moving on the cloud is that you can also apply some more in-depth tomography. My truth table is nice, but it's just looking at the computational basis. Here with a tomography, so you have this tomography tool that is embedded. You will look at all the different projections of your output state in the different bases, X, Y, Z, that show you if your CNOT state is correct or it's not correct. And in that case, it's what we'll be expecting. So this is the same tool that you will find from in Qiskit, for instance, that is very convenient to check the full state. If you want to run that on a real processor, you can do that, but it will be running a lot of measurement before it gets you the actual result. So here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have 16 times 16. So to get this, you need to have 256 measurements. If you consider that you have 1,000 samples of that, and that you have a post-processing section of 1/20, that makes you need to make at least 200,000 samples in 256 different measurements. So it will run probably a few hours on the QPU. That's all for the presentation of the personal internal. So this gives us the tool to make circuit, to run circuits. So I just want you to make the connection to the cloud now. So I invite you to connect to the Candela cloud. Cloud.candela.com. And then we'll see how we can run something on the cloud. So normally you should have created an account. If you don't, it's time to do it. So login. I noticed that some of you created some account but didn't click on the verification link that you received by email. So if you cannot connect, it's because of that. Let me find my password. Okay, when you connect on the cloud, you have something like that. Okay. So this is your dashboard where we see some information, some news. So this week we have we have a maintenance, in fact, that's on the QPU. Because we are upgrading to a larger QPU that will be probably done in 2-3 weeks. So hopefully it will be done when we have the next class. So today we don't have any QPU available, but you can do that. You can see that on the platform. So on the platform you see the different backend that you have available. So today you have some GPU. You will see something a bit different in depend on what you have on your what you have been granted. But normally you see the same than me. You see that you have a GPU backend available because we gave you access to GPU. If you don't see this line, let us know because that means that you didn't send me the email or maybe we missed your email that you sent. So you have some sloth backend, you have QPU scalar. This one is unreachable today. Then you see all the backend that you can use here. So this is your environment where you can see there is two parts that are that you need to be looking at closely. Is the token part. So in the token, so I have a lot of old token. You should create a token on your side. You give the name you want, my token. You can assign a priority to a token. So on your side, don't put normal. It depends also. If you are paying for the access to the cloud, you will have the ability to have a high priority token. And the length of your duration of your token, it normally is by default 30 days. So I have a token that has been created. Here, it's valid. And then I can show and copy the actual token here. So I will copy it in a notebook because I will be using that later. Okay, just to copy my token. Okay, my token will be the parameters that allow my Python script to connect to the cloud. So this one is important, but you need to modify your token. So click on your token. And then you need to check if you have all the permission you want. So your token, my token by default has the permission for all the different platforms. You should not all the different platforms. So I should add the simulator that's called 2v100 has the permission of my token. So my token will have the ability to access this simulator. So you should do the same. So by default, it's not all the platform, the backend are part of the token. So make sure that your token that you define can access the GPU. It is what we'll be doing. So token is important. Job will be showing you all the job that you have been running. So when you are running a job on your Perceval notebook, then this creates a job here that you can see. And we can look at actually the job itself. So this is a test on GPU that I did in December. I requested, so this is the job itself. So I requested 100 samples. Apparently it was a very large circuit. So you see my input state is very large. The circuit itself, I cannot see it. The circuit itself is encoded here. And then I have my output with all the different samples that I get, that I requested. So this is what I receive, my client is receiving at the end of the process. So when you are running a job, look at your job dashboard. You will see the job. You will see how much it takes. You will see if it is running or if it is queued. Sometimes it will be queued because other job will be running at the same time. So just observe that. You have the notion of credits. So on my side, a lot of credits. You should probably have less credit than that, but don't worry because we don't. There is no limitation for the month on your side. And you can see, so it is what I did. So I run some job on QPU, on simulator here, and so on. And you have some link on the documentation. So feel free to explore your Candela Cloud API. And if you have any question, let us know at the next session or send us some email. We'll be answering that. So this is the Candela Cloud. So let us move to the remote computing on the Candela Cloud notebook. So I will be defining. So I define Perceval grading sampler. I'm taking a small circuit MZI. I already went to Candela Cloud to get the API key, the one that is somewhere here. Okay. So the saving of your token is something persistent. It means that it will just be on your on the hard drive where you are running your notebook or your script locally. So you only need to do that once, and then you can run your script without worrying about putting the token. Of course, when the token will be expired, you need to change that, or you need to renew the token. You need to check that the token has the correct right. So it's defined here. So I will be running that on the simulator of Haskella today. I can look at information of my my processor. So the thing that is a bit different than what we did before is so far we are using processor. Processor was meaning something local. Remote processor means on the cloud. Then I'm taking, so here what happened, it took a little bit of time, but you saw that we actually connected to the cloud with my token, and we can check that because if I making a wrong token here, then I have an error. So that means that my connection is correctly working. And I'm getting the circuit equivalent to the processor that I will be running. So this is also something that you can find on the cloud itself. So if you go to platform, You go to QPU scalar, for instance. Okay. And you see that you have the circuit that QPU scalar is implementing. So this is the photonic chip that is behind the scene. So it's a 12 mode photonic chip. And it has this design. This design is not totally random. It's a Clemens interferometer, so universal interferometer. So you can implement any unitary on the 12 mode can be implemented on that photonic chip. So it has been not available recently because of this upgrade that you are working on. You have some parameters information that are interesting. The clock, 80 megahertz. HOM, the last time it was measured, it was very low HOM. 76% is terrible HOM. G2 is very good, 2%. 12 mode, you can send 6 photon on that. And you have some features. So for instance, you say that you have some pseudo-PNR feature that you can enable. You have the mean detected photons. If you want to filter out automatically the quantum states that have less than 3 photons, 2 photons, 1 photons. It depends on what you want. So this is basically the parameters that you have access to on this platform. So this is the circuit. I can display them here too. So on the simulator scalar that I have that I'm connecting to my remote processor, I see basically exactly the same. That's what you are seeing. The constraints, 12 mode, 6 photons. I have some parameters. That is the difference. So since it's simulator, it has some noise, embedded noise, but you can change the noise if you want. So by default, it will have 92 HOM, 0.3% G2, and so on. So this is, you can change them, or you can just let them as they are by default, and it will behave as the real QPU. Yeah. So this is not surprising. I'm setting my circuit, I'm setting my input states. Here I'm fixing manually my parameters, my noise parameters. And I say that I want to filter out all the states that have less than one photon in the output. Then I will be taking 200,000 samples, and I will be running that. So when you run a job, you can run, as we are doing before, sampler.sampleCount. So this works, but this is not synchronous. So the platform, the processor online, cannot be available and answer immediately to any request that comes. So any job is put on a queue. So it is what you call asynchronous. So that means that it's better to run it as with this syntax that will run it as an asynchronous job. So when I run it, I just get an ID that say, okay, my job has been launched with this ID. So I can go on the platform details here. I can go to the job. Okay. And there is a job here, but it's already completed. So the job that I just launched has been completed, but it was there. So if there was a lot of load of you are running that to QPU or to GPU that are more limited, then it will have taken some time. But I can see that my result has been already finalized here. So I'm moving on here. And then this will be the loop. So it's very standard. You can do that. It will be just waiting that your job is complete. On our side, it's already complete. So it's move on. And then I'm getting my results. Okay. Again, what we did is we are sending 2 photons in MZI here. So I have some distribution. We would need to check if it's true or it's not true. And if you want to run that on the QPU, then you just need to change to run that with the QPU. So today QPU is not available because of what I mentioned, but you can run that on the GPU. So the platform name. So GPU is not meant to run very simple circuit as this one. The name is It is this one. It's rather if you want to run some very large circuits, but let us do that on this simulator. Okay, input state and okay, running it on the GPU, waiting for the results. So it has been queued. So if all of you are running that in simultaneously, then you need to, it will just take a little bit of time to run. Let's look at the jobs. Yeah, so it's running 39%. Okay, taking a bit of time. In that case, it's overkilling. So we are using a simulator that is super powerful to run a circuit with 2 modes. It's totally non-efficient. It's the kind of thing that you should avoid. It's really to run some big circuits. And I'm done. And I have my results. Okay. I don't know how to interpret my results. It depends on the circuits. It's just a random circuit, but yeah, it is. So basically, here we are. So you have the ability to define circuits. You have all the command for Perceval. You have the connection to the cloud, and you have access to the most powerful GPU simulator that we have today. So that you should be ready to run some algorithm there. So for today, I will end my presentation. We'll just see if there is more questions. I see that Arnaud Yunju. Let me check for you, Yunju. So I'm switching in admin mode. Yunju. Yeah. Yunju, it's you. So platform permission. Oh, the one that you should take, indeed, it's not. It's simply for GPU2. The one I was using is another one. The difference between the two is that behind GPU2 you have. I think that there is more. We have put more instance of GPU for you. So this is you should use this one. Okay. Does anyone has any questions? So the plan, so I changed a bit the schedule because of the time it took to make the first notebook. But the plan is now we have the next session that will be in 3 weeks. And the next session, we'll just implement algorithm. So, and we'll run them on the GPU. If you want to experiment in between, you have access to the notebook that will be available for all the time. You can go to Perceval that is normally in your repository. If it's not, then you need to git pull it from git clone it from GitHub. And there you have documentation, and in documentation you have a lot of notebooks. So if you want to see and to run with some algorithm, then feel free to go through all of them. So all of them should be working. You can run them locally. You can try to run them on the GPU. So we put a lot of effort to put these notebooks just for training purpose. So feel free to go through this if you have some interest. On our side, what we'll be doing in the next, we'll be working on the version algorithm, which is one of the main common algorithm on which we are working. We will try to see, in particular, we'll see version algorithm for machine learning, a version algorithm for VQE, And we will also try to explore some prem that is a real prem, real world prem, for which we'll try to find some solution, some implementation that we can run on the largest GPU that simulator that we have. Do you have any question for me?
추가 질문 있으신 분 있으시면 지금 질문해 주시고요. 아니면 양자정보연구소센터로 통해가지고 질문 주셔도 됩니다. 그리고 이제 3주 쉬고 그 다음에 이제 윗보가 있을 건데요. 그 기간 동안 그 이번 주에 진행하신 그 예제들을 한번 해보시면서 일단 좀 학습 좀 진행하시고 궁금한 거 있으시면은 연락 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 추가 질문 없으시면 그러면은 윅3 세션 마지막 강의 여기서 마무리 짓도록 하겠습니다. I think there's no more question, John. Thank you for your effort.
Thank you, Doyun. Thank you, Arnaud.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Arnaud.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Enjoy the weekend. Bye-bye.